The Galactic Council had exactly 3 laws that everyone agreed on. The first was, don't blow up inhabited planets. The second was, don't create self-replicating nanobots that eat everything. The third, written in letters so large they could be seen from orbit on the Council's headquarters, was never, under any circumstances, let Deathworlders get organized. For 20,000 years, this had worked perfectly. Until Thursday. Thursday started like any other day for Qualification Officer Blenthorpe 5, which is to say, it started with his third stomach digesting breakfast while his primary consciousness filled out Form 28 Beta Subspecies Employment Clearance for the 19,000th time that fiscal quarter. Blenthorpe 5 was what humans would call a bureaucrat, though the Glorthaxians considered themselves essential facilitators of civilizational continuity. This mostly meant they had 7 eyes specifically evolved to read fine print and a psychological inability to leave any checkbox unmarked. He was having what his species called a satisfactory documentation cycle, when his terminal made a sound that terminals should never make, a sort of electronic whimper followed by what could only be described as a digital scream. "What?" Blenthorpe 5's eye stalks shot upward, knocking his ceremonial filing hat clean off his primary skull ridge. The screen was flashing a color that wasn't in the standard palette of approved notification hues. In fact, the color was so alarming that his species had specifically evolved to find it disturbing, which was quite a feat considering they could perceive in 12 dimensions. The message was simple, too simple. Warning. Employment application volume from Sector 7, Gamma 8, Tertiary 4, has exceeded acceptable parameters by factor of 8 million%. Blenthorpe 5 did what any reasonable bureaucrat would do. He checked if this was a joke. It was not a joke. He checked if this was a system error. It was not a system error. He checked if someone had accidentally designated an entire solar system as a single applicant. Someone had not done that. What someone had done was correctly classify Earth as a Deathworld Class 12, approximately 300 years late. The story of this classification error was itself a masterpiece of bureaucratic incompetence. In the year 2347, by human reckoning, a Glorthaxian survey team had been dispatched to catalogue all inhabited worlds in Sector 7 Gamma. The team leader, a young bureaucrat named Flembix II, had been nursing what humans would call a massive hangover from his spawning celebration the night before. When he reviewed the initial scans of Earth, his hungover primary brain interpreted the thermal signatures of Hawaiian volcanoes as exotic thermal spa facilities. The tornadoes were marked down as atmospheric entertainment features. The earthquakes didn't even register because he'd accidentally left the seismic sensors in sleep mode. Thus, Earth was filed under Marginal Paradise World, Potential Tourist Destination, Recommend Further Development. And no one had bothered to check this for 3 centuries. The actual reclassification had happened 48 hours ago, when a junior auditor named Vinthara accidentally ran a cross-reference check between tourist destination reports and actual atmospheric composition data. She discovered that Earth's oxygen levels were high enough to cause spontaneous combustion in 63% of known galactic species. The gravity would crush 40% of spacefaring civilizations. The bacterial ecosystem was so aggressive that it had dissolved the survey team's sample collection drones. Earth wasn't a marginal paradise world. Earth was a nightmare planet that somehow supported a thriving technological civilization. Vinthara had done what any responsible auditor would do. She'd filed the correction, updated the database, and gone home for her mandatory 20-hour rest cycle. The database had done what any responsible database would do. It had automatically notified all affected parties of the reclassification. Unfortunately, the affected parties included 8 billion humans who had registered on the Galactic Employment Network 3 months earlier. You see, Earth in 2647 was experiencing what economists called a moderate economic adjustment period, and what everyone else called complete economic collapse. The automation revolution had finally eaten every possible job. The universal basic income was universal and basic, but it wasn't exactly exciting. Humans, being humans, had responded to this existential crisis the same way they responded to every crisis, by looking for something, anything, to do. When the Galactic Employment Network had appeared in their computer systems, like a particularly persistent pop-up advertisement, millions of humans had signed up immediately. Most had assumed it was a scam. Some thought it was an elaborate video game. A few conspiracy theorists insisted it was a government psyop. None of them expected it to be real. The network had been happy to accept their applications. After all, Earth was classified as a marginal paradise world. Paradise worlders were known to be soft, peaceful, and utterly unsuited for any real work. The system had automatically filed all human applications under unlikely to accept employment, decorative applications only. Then came the reclassification. Suddenly, every single human application was rerouted from the decorative folder into the Deathworld category. And in the Galactic Employment Network's sophisticated artificial intelligence, a thought process occurred that would change the course of galactic history. Deathworlders, applying for dangerous jobs, obviously qualified, auto-approve everything. By the time Blenthorpe 5 was staring at his screaming terminal, 200 million humans had received job offers for positions that had been listed as unfillable for anywhere between 50 and 6,000 years. Blenthorpe 5 did the only thing his species was good at. He filed an emergency report and forwarded the problem to someone else. That someone else was High Coordinator Jixeral of the Tertiary Employment Council. Jixeral was a Vexithian, which meant she had 42 fingers, no sense of humor, and a pathological need to follow procedures. She read Blenthorpe 5's report 3 times. Then she read it backwards to make sure she hadn't missed anything. Then she had her assistant read it to confirm she wasn't experiencing a hallucination caused by spore exposure. Then she said a word that was banned in 63 civilized systems. We need to convene the council. Now, the Galactic Employment Council met in an emergency session for the first time in 1900 years. The last emergency session had been called when someone discovered a civilization that reproduced through financial speculation. This was somehow worse. The council chamber was a masterpiece of architectural intimidation. The ceiling was so high that weather patterns formed. The walls were carved from a single piece of compressed neutronium. The chairs were ergonomically designed to be comfortable for species ranging from gas clouds to crystalline hive minds. And in the center, on a platform that rotated slowly for dramatic effect, sat the 3 head counselors. Coordinator Milvus was a Pensithian, resembling what humans might call a very disappointed tree with too many eyes. He spoke first, his voice like wind through leaves if the wind was filing a complaint. Let me ensure I understand this correctly. We have 200 million applications from certified Deathworld Class 12 inhabitants for jobs including asteroid mining, atmospheric processor maintenance, toxic waste reclamation, stellar corona research, black hole observation, neutron star geological surveys, and something called customer service in the void retail sectors. That is correct, Coordinator, Jixeral confirmed, her 42 fingers dancing nervously across her tablet. Councillor Brathkek, who looked like a particularly aggressive pile of rocks with opinions, slammed 6 of his 16 appendages on the table. This is impossible. Those positions have been unfilled because they're death sentences. The atmospheric processor maintenance job on Zivixa 4 has killed 832 workers. The last applicant lasted 6 minutes. Technically, 6 minutes and 38 seconds, corrected Councillor Yith, a blob of sentient mercury who handled the technical details. And before we continue, I should mention something. 3 of the humans who applied for that specific position have already been on site for 12 hours. The room went silent. I'm sorry, Milvus said slowly, his bark actually creaking with disbelief. Did you say 12 hours? Yes, and according to the automated reports, they've fixed 6 of the 9 critical failures, invented 2 new efficiency protocols, and are currently arguing about what they called whose turn it is to get lunch. Abrathkek made us sound like rocks grinding together in existential confusion. That's impossible. The atmosphere on Zevixor 4 is sulfuric acid with trace amounts of aerosolized glass. The gravity is 3 times standard. The temperature fluctuates between 400 and minus 200 degrees every 20 minutes. Yes, Yith agreed. The humans called it a bit spicy in their initial report. Milvus felt something he hadn't experienced in his 600 years of life. It was either panic or indigestion, possibly both. We need to stop this immediately. The non-militarization treaty specifically states that Deathworld species cannot be allowed to spread through the galaxy in any organized fashion. There's a problem with that, Jixrol said quietly. According to Galactic Employment Law, specifically Article 23 Omega, Section 19, Subsection 445C, paragraph, the entire paragraph. We cannot refuse employment to qualified applicants without documented cause, and according to the system, every single human applicant is overqualified. Then document cause, Brathkek shouted. Say they're too dangerous. Say they're a security risk. We can't. Jixral's 42 fingers were practically vibrating with distress. The law was written specifically to prevent discrimination against Deathworlders. It was passed 8,000 years ago after the incident with the Krathian Miners' Union. If we refuse these applications, we'll have a civil rights lawsuit that will last 10,000 years. Milvus felt his oldest branch beginning to wither. So you're telling me that our own anti-discrimination laws prevent us from discriminating against the one species we absolutely need to discriminate against? That is exactly what I'm telling you. The council sat in miserable silence. Somewhere in the infinite bureaucratic machinery of the galaxy, a cosmic joke was being played out at their expense. Wait, Yith burbled thoughtfully. How did humans even find out about these positions? The Galactic Employment Network doesn't advertise Deathworld jobs to Paradise World species. Jixral pulled up another screen. After the reclassification, the system automatically sent notifications to all registered Earth users. The message said, and I quote, "Congratulations. Your world classification has been updated. You now qualify for premium employment opportunities previously unavailable to you. Apply today." Premium! Brathkek's rocks were practically vibrating. The system called suicide missions premium opportunities? The algorithm isn't sophisticated enough to understand sarcasm or mortality rates, Yith explained. It just knows that these jobs pay 15 times standard rate because nobody wants them. Milvus made a sound like a tree falling in a forest of regret. How many humans have accepted positions so far? The screen updated. Everyone watched the number climb. And climb, and climb. Oh, gods, Brathkek whispered. They're accepting them all. They were. Across Earth, humans were reading job descriptions that included phrases like mortality rate 99%, previous workers lasted an average of 4 days, radiation levels incompatible with most known biology, and thinking exactly the same thing. Well, it beat sitting on the couch. Trevor Holloway was the first human to actually read the fine print on his job offer. Trevor was a 34-year-old former construction worker from Detroit who had been unemployed for 6 years. When he saw that the premium opportunity involved maintaining fusion reactors in an environment that was described as technically survivable but not recommended, he did what any reasonable human would do. He called his friend Davis. "Dude, you have to see this job offer," Trevor said, his voice crackling over the video call. They're offering 200,000 credits a year to fix reactors on some station called Helixor 9. Davis Pemberton, formerly an oil rig worker from Alaska, squinted at his own screen. Is that the one that says, bring your own radiation shielding in the requirements? That's the one. Man, this is exactly like that job I had on the North Slope, except in space. Does it have unions? Trevor checked. It says here that unions are strongly discouraged due to high member turnover. Death trap, I'm in. This conversation, with minor variations, was happening across Earth. Former firefighters were applying for positions fighting plasma fires on solar mining platforms. Ex-military personnel were signing up for security jobs in sectors described as actively hostile. Deep-sea welders were ecstatic about opportunities to work in pressure environments exceeding standard tolerances by factor of 600. The galaxy, which had spent millennia carefully avoiding anything that might be dangerous, was about to discover what happens when you offer hazard pay to a species that invented the phrase, "hold my beer." Back in the council chamber, Coordinator Milvus was experiencing what his species called terminal decision paralysis. His branches were drooping so low they were touching the floor. "We have to do something," he said weakly. "We can't just let millions of Deathworlders spread across the galaxy, taking every dangerous job available." "Why not?" Yith asked. The Mercury blob had been running calculations and was finding the results fascinating. "According to my projections, if humans maintain their current success rate, we could solve the galactic labor shortage within 3 years." The labor shortage. Brathkek's voice reached frequencies that shattered 2 of the decorative crystals on the walls. "We don't have a labor shortage. We have an intentional avoidance of death scenarios, which has led to critical infrastructure failures across 200 systems," Yith countered. "The atmospheric processes on Zevixor 4 alone have been failing for 60 years. 16 colonies have been evacuated. The economic impact has been catastrophic." "That's different. Those were acceptable losses compared to the risk of..." "The risk of what, exactly?" Yith interrupted. "The humans have been working for 48 hours. Not one incident, not one complaint, not one violation of any regulation. They're just doing the jobs." Milvus felt something shift in his woody consciousness. A terrible, horrible realization. "You're saying we need them." "I'm saying," Yith replied carefully, "that we've built a civilization that's so safe, so regulated, so perfectly optimized for longevity that we've forgotten how to do anything actually difficult. And now we have a species that considers difficult to be Tuesday." The silence that followed was broken by Jixral's terminal beeping. She checked it, and her 42 fingers went completely still. "The first performance reviews are coming in," she said quietly. Everyone leaned forward. Yith displayed the reports on the main screen. Subject Group Theta 38, assigned to toxic waste reclamation on Grelith 2. Expected survival time 4 days. Actual survival time ongoing. Performance notes. Workers have exceeded all safety protocols, have implemented 17 new efficiency measures. Waste processing rate increased by 600%. Workers requested better coffee in the break room. We don't have a break room. They built one. Send coffee. Another report scrolled up. Subject Group Omega 12, assigned to deep space mining operations in the Keltar asteroid field. Expected survival time 2 weeks. Actual survival time ongoing. Performance notes. Workers have established a safety record that exceeds galactic standards. Mining output has tripled. They've started organizing social activities. One of them brought something called a barbecue grill. It shouldn't work in vacuum. It works in vacuum. We have questions. Report after report. Success after success. Humans weren't just surviving the impossible jobs. They were thriving in them. Brathkek's rocks settled into a configuration that suggested defeat. "This is insane." "This is humanity," Yith corrected, "and whether we like it or not, they're solving problems we've been ignoring for centuries." Milvus felt his branches straightening slightly. A terrible idea was forming, an idea that violated everything he believed about safety, caution, and proper risk assessment. An idea that might actually work. "We need to create a new category," he said slowly. "Something that allows humans to work, but keeps them contained, regulated, managed." You mean like a reservation?" Brathkek asked suspiciously. "I mean like a specialized employment zone," Milvus said, his bureaucrat instincts kicking into high gear. "We designate specific sectors for high-risk operations. We staff them exclusively with species that can handle the conditions. We create a whole new branch of labor law, specifically designed around Deathworld capabilities." Jixaral's 42 fingers started moving again, this time with purpose. "We could call it the Hazardous Environment Employment Initiative. Special regulations, special oversight, special everything. It would take years to implement the full bureaucratic framework." "Perfect," Milvus said. "That gives us time to figure out what we've actually done." What they had done, though none of them realized it yet, was open a door that would never close. Because while the Council was busy creating frameworks and regulations and oversight committees, humans were busy being human. On Zevixer 4, Trevor and Davis had not only fixed the atmospheric processes, but had redesigned the entire maintenance schedule. They'd also started a weekly poker game with the station's administrative staff, who were a species of sentient mushrooms that had never understood the concept of bluffing and were consequently terrible at cards. On Grelith 2, a crew of former hazmat specialists had turned toxic waste reclamation into something resembling an actual profession. They'd written a training manual. They'd established safety protocols that were better than galactic standard. One of them had started a blog about it that was getting disturbingly popular among other Deathworld species. In the Keltar asteroid field, the mining crew had increased efficiency so much that they'd finished their 6-month contract in 3 weeks. Rather than leave, they'd asked for more work. When informed there was no more work, they'd found some. Specifically, they'd discovered an asteroid belt that had been marked too dangerous to mine and had started mining it anyway. And everywhere humans went, they did something that no other species had done in 10,000 years of galactic civilization. They made the dangerous jobs better, not safer, not easier, better. They brought music to places that had known only silence. They brought humor to environments defined by terror. They brought a fundamental human assumption that had never occurred to any other species. If you're going to do a horrible job, you might as well do it well and have some fun while you're at it. 3 months after the initial crisis, Coordinator Milvus called another council session. This time it wasn't an emergency. This time it was a reckoning. "The Hazardous Environment Employment Initiative is now officially operational," he announced. "We have successfully contained the human employment situation within manageable parameters." "Contained," Brathkek repeated flatly. "We currently have 2 million humans working in sectors we'd abandoned. They've reactivated 63 critical infrastructure sites. The economic impact is being measured in trillions of credits." "Yes," Milvus agreed. "Contained. They've started teaching other species their methods," Yith added. "We have Deathworld species from 4 other planets requesting similar employment opportunities. The humans are running training programs. All within regulations," Jixral noted, her 42 fingers dancing across multiple tablets simultaneously. Technically, Brathkek's rocks were grinding again. "They've fundamentally altered the galactic economy in 3 months." "All within regulations," Jixral repeated firmly. "I've checked. Extensively." Milvus felt something he hadn't experienced in decades. It might have been satisfaction. It might have been resignation. With bureaucrats, it was hard to tell the difference. "So we're just going to accept this?" Brathkek demanded. "We're going to let Deathworlders do whatever they want as long as they file the proper paperwork." "What's the alternative?" Yith asked reasonably. They're doing jobs that need to be done. They're following all regulations. They're actually improving the systems they work in. What exactly are they doing wrong? The question hung in the air like a particularly uncomfortable cloud. Nothing, Brathkek admitted finally. They're doing nothing wrong. That's what terrifies me. He wasn't the only one who was terrified. Across the galaxy, in comfortable offices on safe planets with reasonable gravity and breathable atmospheres, managers were having similar realizations. The humans weren't just workers. They were a force of nature. On the mining colony of Perlax 6, human workers had discovered that the local overseer had been embezzling funds meant for safety equipment. They'd filed a formal complaint, and when that was ignored, they'd gone on strike. The strike lasted exactly 3 hours before management caved completely because the alternative was actually having to do the mining themselves. On the research station orbiting the neutron star, designated NGC 7293, a crew of human astrophysicists had gotten into an argument with the lead researcher about data interpretation. The argument had escalated until someone suggested they take it outside. The lead researcher, not understanding human idioms, had agreed. They'd gone outside, onto the station's exterior hull, in spacesuits, while orbiting a neutron star. The humans had won the argument and also discovered 3 new types of exotic radiation. And on Helixa 9, Trevor and Davis had been promoted to senior maintenance supervisors, which meant they were now in charge of training the next batch of human workers. Their training program included lectures on safety protocols, hands-on reactor maintenance, and something they called team-building exercises that involved competitive sports in low gravity. "I don't understand it," Davis said one day during their lunch break, floating in the station's observation lounge while eating a sandwich that technically shouldn't exist in 0G. "These aliens act like this job is some kind of death sentence." Trevor, who was practicing doing backflips off the ceiling, laughed. "Dude, compared to working construction in Detroit in summer, this is easy. We get breaks, the pay is amazing, and nobody's shooting at us. The radiation levels would kill most species in about 6 minutes. Yeah, but the suits are rated for 6 hours. That's like 100 times safer than it needs to be." This conversation represented a fundamental disconnect that the galaxy was slowly beginning to understand. Humans didn't think they were doing anything special. They thought they were doing normal jobs. The galaxy thought humans were performing miracles. Both were correct. 6 months into the program, the Galactic Employment Council received a report that made even Milvus pause in his endless paperwork. "Someone's compiled statistics," Jixral announced, "on human employment outcomes." The council gathered around her terminal. The numbers scrolled across the screen like a particularly aggressive prophecy. Mortality rate for human workers in hazardous environments, 0.03%. For comparison, the previous mortality rate for the same jobs was 68%. Efficiency improvements, average increase of 400% across all sectors. Safety violations, exactly 3, all of which were humans implementing better safety measures than required by regulations. Workers injured, requiring medical intervention, 238. Workers who returned to work after medical intervention, 238. Cost savings to galactic infrastructure, estimated at 4 trillion credits annually. New applications for hazardous environment positions from Earth, increasing by 10,000 per day. Yith made a sound like Mercury laughing. "We haven't solved the labor shortage. We've eliminated it." "At what cost?" Brathkek demanded. "We've let Deathworld spread across hundreds of systems." "Yes," Milvus agreed. "And in doing so, we've saved the galactic economy, restored critical infrastructure, and created a new sector of employment law that actually works." He paused. "I'm as surprised as you are." But the real surprise was still coming. Because while the Council was congratulating itself on managing the human situation, humans were doing what humans do best. They were adapting. On a station designated merely as Sector 88 Holding, a human named Roxanne Valdez was having a conversation that would echo through history. Roxanne was a former chemical engineer who'd taken a job processing volatile compounds in an environment that was described in the job listing as aggressively lethal. She'd found it boring after the first week and had started experimenting with the compounds during her downtime. She'd just invented a new alloy that was 17 times stronger than anything the galaxy had seen in 3,000 years. She'd done it by accident while trying to make a better coffee mug. "I don't understand," her supervisor, a Glorthaxian named Pelvic 7, said while staring at the test results. "This is impossible. The bonding structure violates 6 fundamental principles of materials science." "Yeah," Roxanne agreed, sipping from her new mug. "But it works. And look, it keeps my coffee hot for hours." Pelvic 7 felt every one of his 7 eyes dilating in panic. "Do you have any idea what this means? This could revolutionize everything from spacecraft design to, can I patent it?" "What? I invented it. I want to patent it. Is there like a galactic patent office or something?" There was. Within 2 weeks, Roxanne had filed the paperwork. Within 2 months, she was fielding offers from mega corporations. Within 6 months, she was rich and had quit her job to start her own materials research company, staffed entirely by humans who were bored with their hazardous environment jobs and wanted something more challenging. This was the pattern that would repeat 1,000 times over. Humans taking dangerous jobs, getting bored, and then innovating out of sheer desperate need for mental stimulation. A maintenance crew on a plasma reactor station invented a new type of energy-efficient cooling system because they were tired of sweating all the time. A group of asteroid miners developed a revolutionary navigation algorithm because they were sick of taking the long way around. A solo worker maintaining atmospheric processes on a toxic hellworld discovered a new chemical process that could terraform hostile planets. And her response was, "Cool, does this mean I get a bonus?" The galaxy had spent 10,000 years carefully preserving the status quo. Humans had spent 6 months completely destroying it, and they'd done it without even trying. 1 year after the first human workers were hired, the Galactic Employment Council held what they hoped would be their final emergency session on the subject. "We need to discuss the human situation," Milvis began. "There is no human situation," Yith interrupted. "There's a human revolution, and we're just living through it." Brathkek had stopped grinding his rocks in agitation. Now he just sounded tired. "They've taken over every hazardous sector. They've improved efficiency across the board. They've invented 17 new technologies. They've established cultural exchange programs with 68 species. They've started schools. What exactly are we supposed to do about any of this?" "Nothing," Jixral said quietly. "We do nothing, because they're not breaking any laws. They're not causing any problems. They're just being extremely good at their jobs." "They're making the rest of the galaxy look incompetent," Brathkek protested. "We were incompetent," Yith said bluntly. "We built a civilization so focused on safety that we forgot how to do anything. The humans are just reminding us what competence looks like." Milvis felt his branches settling into a new configuration. Not quite acceptance, not quite resignation, something in between. "So that's it? We just let them continue? What choice do we have?" Jixral spread her 42 fingers in a gesture of helplessness. "They're following every regulation. They're exceeding every expectation. They're improving the systems they work in. The only thing they're guilty of is being too good at their jobs. And that," Yith added, "is not actually a crime." But elsewhere in the galaxy, in a quiet office on a planet whose name translated roughly to place of calculated decisions, someone was having very different thoughts about the human situation. Ambassador Kelthrix was a Favarian, a species known for their long-term planning and even longer-term paranoia. She'd been watching the human employment situation with growing concern for the past year, not because humans were dangerous, but because they were successful. "They're everywhere," she said to her assistant, a young Favarian named Delmire, who hadn't yet developed the species' characteristic anxiety. "In 12 months, they've spread to 400 systems. They control every hazardous sector. They've become essential to galactic infrastructure." "Isn't that good?" Delmire asked, genuinely confused. The economic reports show that we're dependent on them." Kelthrix's voice scaled up through several octaves of concern. "What happens if they decide they want more than just jobs? What happens if they realize they have leverage? Why would they want leverage? They're just workers. They're Deathworlders, who we've trained, equipped, and spread across the entire galaxy. We've given them access to everything. And we did it because we were desperate to fill jobs that nobody else wanted." Delmire considered this. "So, what do you propose we do?" "I propose we start planning for contingencies, because sooner or later humans are going to realize what they've become. And when they do, the galaxy is going to change, whether we like it or not." She was right, though not in the way she expected. The change didn't come from humans demanding more power or organizing a revolution. It came from something far more mundane and far more human. It came from a complaint form. The complaint was filed by a human named Marcus Okonkwo, who worked as a stellar cartographer in a sector designated too boring to actually name. Marcus had been mapping neutron star positions for 8 months and had discovered something interesting. Several map positions were wrong, not slightly wrong, completely wrong. The kind of wrong that suggested someone had made them up, rather than actually doing the surveys. Marcus did what any reasonable person would do. He filed a formal complaint about the bad data, along with his corrected survey information, and went back to work. What he didn't know was that the bad data had been filed by a senior cartographer named Belvix, who'd been faking survey results for 30 years. Belvix had been planning to retire soon, having successfully avoided doing any real work for most of his career. The humans' complaint threatened to expose the entire fraud. Belvix made a decision that would prove catastrophic. He tried to delete Marcus's complaint and all associated survey data. He failed because humans had backed up their data in 17 different locations and had filed physical copies with 3 separate regulatory agencies. Because that's what you do when you're doing actual work and want to make sure nobody erases it. The scandal that followed was spectacular. Belvix wasn't just fired, he was investigated. The investigation revealed that the fake surveys had been going on for 60 years across multiple departments. Critical navigation data that ships had been using was wrong, potentially catastrophically wrong. The response from the galactic bureaucracy was swift and predictable. They formed a committee to investigate the investigation. They created new regulations about survey data. They held meetings about having meetings about implementing the new regulations. The response from human workers was different. They fixed it. Every human cartographer in the galaxy, along with several hundred who weren't officially cartographers but knew their way around a star chart, volunteered to redo every survey in the affected sectors. It would take years. It would be tedious, difficult, and absolutely critical. They finished in 8 months. The galaxy watched in stunned silence as humans did something that no species had managed in recorded history. They fixed a systemic problem through sheer determined competence. And that was when Ambassador Kelthrix's fears came true. Not because humans demanded anything, but because the galaxy realized something. They couldn't function without humans anymore. The revelation hit the Galactic Council like a meteor made of bureaucratic terror. "We have a problem," Yith announced at their routine monthly meeting, which had become significantly less routine since humans showed up. "A theoretical problem. A catastrophic theoretical problem." Milvus felt his branches tensing. "Define catastrophic." "If humans decided to stop working tomorrow, Galactic civilization would begin collapsing within 6 months. The silence was profound. "That's impossible," Brathkek said, but his rock sounded uncertain. "We survived for thousands of years before humans." "Yes, by ignoring problems," Yith replied, displaying a truly terrifying amount of data. "Critical infrastructure that we'd abandoned is now operational again, but only because humans maintain it. Safety protocols that we couldn't enforce are now standard because humans actually follow them. Entire sectors of the economy now depend on human innovation and work. If they left, we'd be back to the crisis we were in 18 months ago, except worse, because now we actually know what functional infrastructure looks like." Jixroll's 42 fingers were trembling. "You're saying we've become dependent on a Deathworld species in less than 2 years?" "I'm saying we were always dependent on someone to do the actual work," Yith corrected. "We just convinced ourselves we could ignore it. Humans showed us we were wrong." Milvus processed this information through his vegetative neural network. A thought was forming, a truly horrible thought. "So the question isn't whether we can trust humans. The question is whether they can trust us." Everyone turned to stare at him. "Think about it," he continued. "We accidentally classified their planet wrong. We accidentally offered them all our worst jobs. We've spent 18 months being terrified of them, while they've been nothing but competent, professional, and honest. They've improved everything they've touched, and we're sitting here worried about them being a threat? They're Deathworlders!" Brathkek protested weakly. "So what?" Milvus's voice reached timber-shaking levels. "They've had access to critical infrastructure across 400 systems for over a year. If they wanted to hurt us, they could have done it 1,000 times over. Instead, they've been fixing things and filing proper paperwork." The realization spread through the council chamber like a particularly uncomfortable truth. "Oh, gods," Brathkek whispered. "We're the problem. We've always been the problem." "Not the problem," Yith corrected gently. "Just not the solution. Humans are showing us what the solution looks like, and it looks like work. Actual, difficult, necessary work. Meanwhile, on approximately 600 stations, mining operations, research facilities, and hazardous environment sites across the galaxy, humans were completely unaware of the existential crisis they were causing. They were too busy doing their jobs. Trevor and Davis had been promoted again, this time to regional coordinators for reactor maintenance across an entire sector. They'd celebrated by organizing a zero-gravity basketball tournament that had attracted participants from 15 different species. The Glorthaxians were terrible at it, but seemed to be having fun anyway. Roxanne had expanded her materials research company into a full-scale industrial operation. She had 3,000 employees, 200 of whom were human, and the rest of whom were from species who'd been inspired by the human approach to innovation. Her latest project was a new type of ship hull that was both cheaper and more durable than anything currently used. She expected to patent it next Tuesday. Marcus had been offered a promotion to senior cartographer, which he'd turned down because it would mean less time actually doing surveys. Instead, he'd started a training program for anyone who wanted to learn proper survey techniques. It had attracted students from 40 species. Marcus suspected only half of them were actually interested in cartography, but he appreciated their enthusiasm anyway. And across the galaxy, 2 million humans were doing what humans had always done. They were working, improving, innovating, and occasionally complaining about the coffee while making everyone around them slightly better at their jobs through sheer example. They had no idea they'd become the load-bearing support structure of galactic civilization. They wouldn't have cared if they knew. They had work to do. 2 years after the first human workers were hired, the Galactic Council made a decision that would formalize what everyone already knew. "We're creating a new category in the Galactic Employment Framework," Milvus announced. "The Special Competence Designation. For species who demonstrate exceptional ability in hazardous or critical infrastructure roles. You mean humans, Brathkek said flatly. I mean any species who qualifies, Milvis corrected, but yes, mostly humans. What does this designation actually do? Jixril asked. It acknowledges reality, Yith said simply. It formalizes that certain species are better suited for certain roles. It provides legal framework for the situation we already have. And it stops us from panicking every time humans do something we couldn't do ourselves. The vote was unanimous. Not because everyone agreed it was the best solution, but because everyone agreed it was the only solution. The announcement was made through official channels. It included 17 pages of regulations, 43 subsections of qualifications, and a preamble about diversity in the workplace that nobody read. The human response was characteristically practical. Cool, Trevor said when he heard about it. Does this mean we get better coffee in the break rooms? That, more than anything else, summarized the human perspective on the entire situation. They didn't want recognition or special status. They wanted decent coffee and maybe some better temperature controls in the processing areas. But the galaxy had learned something important, something that would reshape civilization for millennia to come. Safety and comfort were important. Longevity and stability mattered. But none of it meant anything if nobody was willing to do the actual work of maintaining it. The galaxy had built a paradise for species that wanted to live forever in peace. But paradise still needs maintenance. It needs repair. It needs someone willing to climb into the reactor core at 3 in the morning because something's making a weird noise. Humans were those someones. Not because they were special, not because they were suicidal, but because they understood something the rest of the galaxy had forgotten. Sometimes the most important job is the one nobody else wants to do, and somebody's got to do it. 5 years after the first job offers went out, the galaxy looked very different. Not in obvious ways. There were no great wars, no political upheavals, no revolutions or paradigm shifts, but in the maintenance logs, in the efficiency reports, in the safety statistics, in the quiet, mundane, absolutely critical work that kept civilization running. That's where the revolution was, in the thousands of humans who showed up every day to do jobs that needed doing, in the training programs they ran, teaching other species that hard work wasn't a death sentence, in the innovations they created out of boredom because the difficult jobs became routine. The galaxy had created strict laws against Deathworld militarization because they were terrified of what might happen if dangerous species got organized. They never imagined what would happen if dangerous species got employed. They never imagined that the greatest threat to the status quo wouldn't be armies or weapons or invasion fleets. It would be competence. It would be work ethic. It would be humans looking at an impossible job and saying, yeah, I can probably figure that out. Ambassador Kelthrix, now significantly older and no less paranoid, sat in her office reviewing the latest reports. The ones that showed human employment had stabilized at around 8 million workers across 600 sectors. The ones that showed innovation rates had increased by 3,000% in human-dominated fields. The ones that showed that 32 other Deathworld species had applied for similar employment programs, all citing human success as inspiration. They didn't conquer us, she said quietly to Delmere, who was now her senior assistant and had developed quite a lot of the species-appropriate anxiety. They didn't need to. No, Delmere agreed. They just showed up and started fixing things. That's somehow worse. Or better, Kelthrix mused. I can't decide which. She never would, because the question of whether humanity's integration into galactic civilization was a threat or a salvation was ultimately the wrong question. The right question was simpler, more practical, and very, very human. What needs fixing today? And somewhere on a station orbiting a neutron star, or in a mine deep in an asteroid belt, or on a planet with gravity that could crush most species into paste, a human was asking exactly that question and rolling up their sleeves to find the answer. The galaxy had zero tolerance for Deathworld militarization, but it had infinite tolerance for Deathworld competence. And that made all the difference.